The question is this bill be now read a second time. I give the call to the member for Bowman.
Deputy Speaker, thank you. And I think for both sides of this chamber to be able to rise and speak about our famous war memorial is a great opportunity and one that's rarely afforded to us. TripAdvisor itself ranked the War Memorial as number 17 in the top 20 tourist attractions in the world. I mean, narrowly edging out the Big Banana from Coffs Harbour and the wave pool in my colleague's electorate in Western Sydney. But this is a magnificent place to visit. And I'd been visiting World War II and World War I, battle scenes and cemeteries for a long time and hadn't actually been to the War Memorial as a child. There are 1 million Australians and foreign tourists who pass through every year, 200,000 students, but that's not every Australian student. It should be the goal of this place to make sure that every young Australian gets to see the Australian War Memorial. And while this bill is about ensuring that charges are never paid to walk in those hallowed doors or to park there, I do not for a moment think that for however bad we have thought of the previous 6 years of Labor government, I don't think they ever would have fallen to charging for the War Memorial. I acknowledge now that putting it in legislation is a smart move, but I don't for one moment doubt that both sides of this chamber respects the Australian War Memorial for the wonderful job it does, both in commemorating those 102,000 Australians who've given their life for the democracies and freedoms that we enjoy, but also to tell the stories. I mean, many of us as Australian families, and I would count mine among them, don't actually have veterans who served overseas. So those stories weren't passed through to me directly, and so it's so vital that as a 10-year-old in the 1970s, when turning up to Anzac Day parades was not only optional but probably undesirable, that turned around and Australia realised what we were missing out on, what we potentially could lose as we saw our veterans becoming older each year. And Australia seized that opportunity and successfully we've grasped it and we've continued now that connection to those who served in the two great wars and before. What many people don't realise, Deputy Speaker, is that the War Memorial covers all of Australia's engagements right back to 19th century colonial engagements in Africa. It goes all the way through, obviously, to Iraq and Afghanistan. And most importantly also, where Australia's service is increasingly becoming world-renowned, and that's in peacekeeper missions. Australia deployed in over a dozen locations around the world in the last 10 years. But peacekeeper missions are just as important. It's peace building and peacekeeping, and doing this with our United Nations partners is increasingly the new order. We can stabilise parts of the world that otherwise would descend into war by prompt responses from an alliance of nations, often those that are most closely bounded to it. I mean, we need to find local and regional solutions to these challenges. It's not up to the great powers and the advanced economies to be stepping in to every sort of internecine disagreement that we find in the far corners of often continents far from our own. So Australia does a great job there, but I would like to, in this opportunity that I have, mention one great omission, and that is that since the end of World War II, we have not recognised in the form of a simple medal those people who gave their life for our country. It was cancelled straight after World War II. It was known as the Mother's Medal, and I concede it wasn't the best conceived plan at a time when Australia really had financial problems post-war. Sending out a Mother's Medal by getting a letter in the mail saying please pick it up at the post office was simply not good enough. We can do far better than that. And the leading democratic nations for whom we would call partners and allies have an arrangement where the next of kin are recognised. The people who on your service papers are identified as next of kin deserve, I think, no less than a palpable physical token of our absolute appreciation for someone who makes the ultimate sacrifice, serving overseas. We should be doing what Canada, the US, in the form of their Purple Heart, the UK, many European countries and even New Zealand does. I believe that is, and if it isn't, it should be coalition policy. The cost would be infinitesimal. It doesn't add to the complexity of the military medal system because it's a medal to the next of kin. It doesn't qualify as a military medal. And when we take this concept one step further, and I made my references to peacekeeping, perhaps an Australian who gives their life in the service of our nation in a peacekeeping role deserves not the same medal but a similar medal, because that sacrifice for those parents is no less. No less. And if you give your life serving an Australian NGO, for instance, in Africa, in a highly unstable location where there could be either terrorist activity or intertribal disputes where our aid workers are caught up and ultimately also pay with their lives, then I think that we should recognise that in a formal way. The first question that one would be asked is, well, who should be eligible? Now, that's quite simple. There's the Humanitarian Service Overseas Medal, the HSOM, that clearly identifies areas of service that are supported by the Australian government, and that lists right back to many decades, clearly identifying the periods and the organisations that are eligible. If an Australian serves in a way that they're eligible for the Humanitarian Service Overseas Medal, they should, if they pay the ultimate sacrifice, I think be formally recognised. It's a great omission in our awards, and I think it's one that, that this current government could examine. But in conclusion, we're fixing another problem today, and I know that those visiting the War Memorial for years and decades to come will go back to Hansard and read the debate that we're having today about guaranteeing free entry, because there is no more important story, not only the commemoration of the service, but hearing the stories about people who were just like us. They were coming from families just like us. And as we travel around Australia, many of us who live in the cities often forget the extraordinary price in numbers that regional parts of Australia played. And you can visit a town like Scone or Orange or other smaller regional cities in Queensland and see enormous numbers of names of young, mostly men, but also women, who served overseas and gave their lives. And to those country towns that staffed and filled the ranks and file of our military in those two wars, I think we who live in the city and enjoy the dividends now of their service should be eternally grateful.